Welcome to Series 2, Episode 11 of the In Her Financial Shoes podcast. Welcome to the In Her Financial Shoes podcast with me, Catherine Morgan, founder of The Money Panel, helping you to get financially naked. Listen in each week where we talk about that taboo subject of money. Listen to brutally real-life stories, step into our guest shoes and be left feeling 100% confident and in control. Oh, and we hate financial jargon, so don't expect any here. Small steps, big wins, let's go. Hi, and welcome to the show. So today I'd love to share with you what I've been up to over the last 2 weeks. And in episode 5 of series 2, I spoke with Bage, who is a behavioural finance expert, about a 2-week tour that him and I were about to embark upon amongst 2 other incredible speakers. And I've literally just returned from that tour, which was with a company called Nucleus, who are an investment platform for financial advisors. And we started off the tour, which was the Nucleus Illuminate Tour in Belfast last Tuesday. And we went from Belfast to London, London to Birmingham. And then this week we've been in Bristol, Leeds and Glasgow. My first time in Glasgow, actually. In fact, my first time in Leeds as well. Learned some interesting facts about both cities and had some awesome people attending the workshops and the speaker events. It was just an absolutely incredible couple of weeks. It's been, so much fun. And I wanted to share with you what I have learned from, first of all, throwing myself out there and doing something that was a little bit uncomfortable for me to do. And also to share with you some of the things that I was teaching and hopefully inspiring some other financial advisors in my topic. So first of all, what did I actually cover in my speaker session? So I've actually got in front of me the slides that I used during my presentation. Now, this was an hour-long workshop that we delivered a couple of times every day. So I'm not going to run through every single slide with you. I just want to give you a couple of short snippets around this. But the first thing that I wanted to do was to get the profession talking about the benefits of financial coaching. And we first of all kind of kicked off the presentation thinking about what was the impact of the role that a financial coach can have on managing clients' behaviours and helping them to stay on track, rather than necessarily just focusing on the outcomes in terms of recommendations and products. And it was really interesting. There was quite a lot of advisors already in the groups that were kind of practicing the concepts of financial coaching, which was wonderful to hear. And it's a big part of my mission is that if I can help to, help other financial advisors to progress or implement financial coaching into their businesses, then I believe with the power of the combination of financial education combined with the ability to help manage our behaviours around money, that's where we're going to get some total transformation for people around their behaviour with money. And I started off the presentation with talking about financial coaching, and then I went on to tell a little bit about my own personal story and how that really impacted the work that I was doing many years ago as a financial advisor, and how it made me think about how I connected with clients. And it was a very personal story. I shared some of it in one of my earlier podcasts, and I will do a separate podcast on that another time. But it really sort of resonated with some of the audience to help them think about how much jargon we are guilty sometimes of using in our profession, and not just the financial profession, but lots of other professions. Certainly within the medical profession, there was an instance where a lot of jargon was being used with me at a time that, where I needed to have some security and comfort that actually my little boy was going to be okay. This was a time when he was first born and was very, very poorly. And the result of the jargon being used with me at that particular time meant I felt very, 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 very stupid, very, very silly. And it made me really think about how we kind of suffer with this curse of knowledge, and this may be applicable for you listening within your profession, is that we've been in our profession often for a long time, and we're so used to the jargon and the language of that particular profession. And certainly in the financial services profession, even just simple concepts and words like pensions, drawdown, the stock market indices, the FTSE 100, active funds, passive funds, all of this jargon I'm very, very used to using that jargon because I've been in the profession for almost 20 years, but not everybody has. And I think that we do have to be really mindful of that and thinking about what language are we using? Are we suffering with this curse of knowledge where we forget sometimes that not everybody has the same level of knowledge as we do? So that was a really interesting sort of point of conversation. And we went from there talking about what we call our kind of personal influences and also culturally what's going on for us that impacts on how we feel about money. And I shared part of my personal story, and we went on to talk about what does kind of British culture teaches us about money. And it was actually quite interesting because obviously being over in Ireland, there was different cultural beliefs in Irish history versus British history versus Scottish history. And British culture, typically tells us that hard work equals success. And that comes from, the old, you think back to many years ago, where you've got the British aristocracy of the rich and the poor. And if you wanted to have any value in society, you had to be wealthy. And what that taught us, that British culture taught us, is that you have to be wealthy to be successful and to be valued in society. And what happens is these cultural beliefs then get entwined with things like media influence and magazine influence and newspaper articles and social media and books that we read and religion. What does religion teach us about money? And all these things that kind of go on around the periphery that we exist in. And often this sits in our subconscious. We're not necessarily always aware of it, but actually if we were to just look at it, it really affects our subconscious beliefs. And one of the campaigns that I love that really focuses and draws attention around this kind of cultural belief system that we exist in was a campaign that was run by Starling Bank called Make Money Equal. And what Starling Bank did is they did some research around some of the different language that was used towards men and women about money. And actually, I'll put the slide that I used in my presentation that's actually on Starling Bank's website. I'll put the link into that in the show notes and into the blog as well, so you can have a look at that. But really interesting to see that some of the language that was used towards men were words like impress, money, power, fame, capital, like invest your bonus to get ahead, put the pedal down on your future and invest in a classic car. Very, very status driven and all about power and fame and control. And conversely, the language that was used towards women were things like rein in your spending habits, saving pennies, hints and tips, how to be a rich girl. Really, really interesting to think about the differences that just the media alone uses in their description around money towards men and towards women. And what it made me think about was, what impact does that have on us? What impact does it have on hearing words like rein in your spending habits and saving pennies? That to me is all about being frugal with money and actually not being very good with money, when there's lots of research to actually show the complete opposite, that we are very good with money. And actually for women in particular, we make very, very good investors, because actually once we've made the decision to invest, we stick to those decisions. We're less likely to try and time the markets or to try and, come in and out of the markets at different times. Once we make a decision, we tend to stick. And again, I'll put a link to the research around this too in the show notes and in the blog. So that was really, really interesting. And we kind of went from talking about media influences and social media influences, about the impact that has on young people, that the likes of Instagram, for example, that's all about that Instagram life, that perfect filtered life. What impact does that have on our kids growing up? And what values and messages does that tell them about money? And really interesting, actually, we had a sort of open discussion in the workshops about children and some of the messages that they're hearing, but also the belief that they are kind of growing up around is that everything is instant. It's this kind of instant gratification. And that really resonated with a lot of the audience members who have teenage children growing up. And we kind of moved from that conversation to talk about what we call the kind of iceberg theory. So we have conscious decisions and unconscious decisions, and it's what sits underneath the surface, the unconscious decisions that we're making around society and habits and our values and our emotions and beliefs and our behaviours, our personal experiences and things that are going on around us that have an impact on our subconscious belief system. And we then went on from there to talk about, we actually did an actual exercise where I left the audience to answer one particular question, which for those of you that follow the podcast will know that I ask all of my guests to answer, which is, what is your earliest experience of money? And I gave each group a couple of minutes to answer that question. And it was really fascinating to hear some of their stories back. And a lot of their stories were based around a couple of key sort of money blocks. The first one being that money doesn't grow on trees. And the second one, that sort of burying their head in the sand, that money was not talked about in the house. And there was very few instances of actually money being quite abundant and there being an abundance of wealth in the household, or, kind of being spoilt and that kind of, potentially more of a, what's the word I'm trying to think of, like a more privileged background. There were certainly more people in the audience that heard these kind of common messages about money not growing on trees or not talking about money at all. And what was really interesting for me is that this concept of burying your head in the sand or money doesn't grow on trees is that it puts our mindset into scarcity mindset. Because if money doesn't grow on trees, what does that teach us about money? It teaches us that it's not easy to come by, that we have to work hard for our money. And what does that teach us about money? That if we feel like we're on this kind of constant treadmill of work, and we have to work harder and harder and harder because money doesn't grow on trees, it's hard to come by. And that puts us subconsciously into scarcity mindset. And we then kind of went on to talk about, well, how do we challenge that belief? And I left the audience with 3 steps. And this is something that actually you can work through for yourselves if you're listening to this. And perhaps if you're listening to this while you're driving or you're commuting, then have a look at the blog and you'll be able to sort of have a look at each of these steps, because you'll need a pen and paper for this exercise. But step 1 was looking at, once you've answered that question of what was your earliest experience of money, what are you gaining from holding on to that belief? That's step 1. What are you gaining from holding on to this belief? So one of those things could be, if you were told that money doesn't grow on trees, one of the benefits of having that belief is that you work hard. That's the consequence. You were told that money doesn't grow on trees, and therefore you work really hard for your money. And that's a really good benefit. And I think it's important to start with the benefits, because we too easily beat ourselves up. That's the first thing that we are, it's very, very easy to beat ourselves up and think of the problems that this creates. But actually, what are the benefits of that too? And this actually, interestingly, is what we call an affective bias. And going back to the podcast episode with Neil Bage, this is an affective bias. It's about, we always go to the negative before we go to the positive. So what are you gaining from holding on to this belief? Step 2 is then flipping that belief and looking at what is the challenge that having that belief holds for you. So if that belief is money doesn't grow on trees, what is the challenge of having that belief? So the challenge could be, well, it means that I do feel like I have to work hard and I'm on this constant treadmill and I'm working 20 hours a day and I'm not spending enough time at home with the family, or I'm not going on holiday as much because I feel like I have to work, because that was what was told to me whilst I was growing up around money. So the challenge there is, once you've identified what that challenge is, flip that belief. Think about flipping the coin. What would happen if you thought the opposite? What would happen if money was easily available and you didn't have to work hard for your money? What would happen if you could just explore the opportunity to think that maybe money isn't scarce, that money is more abundant? And without kind of getting too woo-woo into the abundance of money conversation here, in reality, it's just about, what's the challenge? What's the positive? What would happen if you were to think the opposite? And once you've identified what would happen to flip that belief, that gives you some momentum. It gives you something to think about. Oh, actually, do you know what? Maybe if I didn't feel like I had to work so hard, I could have some more time for myself. And then the next step, step 3, is thinking about what needs to happen for you to make this happen. So identify 2 or 3 simple things that you can do today that can help you to flip that belief and make the change that you need to make that happen. Now, there's a lot of things kind of to explore around the periphery of these steps. But essentially, if you can work yourself through those steps, you'll start to feel that actually you're kind of challenging some of those self-beliefs and maybe bringing them up to the surface. And for some people, just being aware of them, it can be enough to kind of think about changing their relationship with money. Sometimes it can take longer. This isn't necessarily an instant change, but just thinking about them and bringing them to the surface can be really empowering, really transformational. And that's essentially what we kind of focused on during the session. And what I wanted to do was to get other financial advisors to be practicing some of those questions with their audience and their clients, and thinking about, rather than just building awesome financial plans for people, how can we take that to another level? How can we help them to, how can they help their clients to manage their emotions and behaviours around money? Because, essentially for many of us, it's our behaviours and our emotions that hold us back, right? We know what we should be doing, but we're fearful of making that step because of something that's holding us back. So that was what I was kind of talking about on the speaker tour. And I also wanted to share with you, what else did I learn about myself being on that speaker tour for the last 2 weeks? And the major thing that I learned is just to say yes and think about it later. And I remember when I first got this call to go on the speaker tour, it was in January. I'd just come out of hospital from being really, really poorly. I could hardly talk, actually. I remember the conversation. I could hardly talk. And I just remember saying yes and thinking, putting down the phone and thinking, oh my gosh, have I got the confidence to deliver 4 speaker 1-hour sessions every single day for 2 weeks, or for 6 days? It was 3 days the first week and 3 days the second week. But I just said yes. And I thought, right, I'll say yes and think about it later. And it made me think about, how does this relate to money and how we make decisions around money, but also how do we make decisions around business? How many times do you say no to things thinking that you don't have the self-belief and confidence to think that you can do it? And how often does this relate to money? How often do we not get started with something because there's this fear and emotion that's holding us back? So the message is, just get started and figure it out later. And particularly when it comes to investing, don't worry too much about the nitty-gritty detail, because once you get started, you'll then get more interested in the minor detail of, should you be invested in this fund or this fund, this company or this company? If you follow the basic steps that I've been teaching you in this podcast series, that will help you to avoid making some of the mistakes and falling into traps like investment scams, and actually just start to feel a little bit confident with yourself and your own ability. I believe that everybody has the ability to make good financial decisions, but often it's the behaviours and the emotions that actually hold us back. So finally, I just wanted to leave you with some information about a free 5-day challenge that I'm going to be running that starts on the 30th of June. That's 2019, if you're listening to this podcast in the future. And the 5-day challenge is going to help you to start taking some actions about plugging your money leaks. Now, for me, plugging your money leaks is about managing your mindset and your behaviors around money, as well as the practical steps. There's no point in, you could build up the most amazing spending plan, and then you find that you just fall off the wayside because you're not managing the emotions and the behaviours that are actually getting in the way of you following that plan. So I do really believe that it's about managing both. And that's what this 5-day challenge is going to do. So the 5-day challenge is going to be held within Facebook. And there'll be a challenge for you to do over the 5 days starting. So we kick off on Sunday, the 30th of June at 8:00. We're going to do a live in Facebook. And the challenge itself will start from Monday, the 1st of July, and it will run for 5 days. It's totally free, so please come and join us over in the challenge. You'll need to register on the link, which I'll pop in the show notes and in the blog. And it's an amazing opportunity. I don't know when I'm going to run this challenge again, so please do join and take advantage, I guess, of having that space to join other women in there that are going through exactly the same challenges as you. And I really, really am excited to kind of share with you 5 simple, easy things that you can do to try and get more confidence with money, more control over your spending habits, to kind of remove some of that financial fog and help you gain some clarity. So do make sure that you join the challenge. I'll pop the link in the group, and I'll look forward to joining you on that on the 30th of June. So thank you so much for listening to the podcast today. Next week, I'm going to be sharing with you some of the key learnings that I've taken from 2 conferences that I'm attending. One is the Financial Wellbeing Conference run by Chris Budd, who's also been on the podcast. And the second one is a marketing conference run by Martin Bamford, who also actually runs a personal finance podcast called Informed Choice. Chris Budd also runs the Financial Wellbeing podcast. So 2 other amazing podcasts. If you're not listening to those already, make sure you go over and follow those and pop those on your list of listens. And I'm going to be sharing some of the key takeaways from those 2 particular conferences. But in the meantime, thank you so much for all your reviews. They're much, much appreciated. They do help me to kind of get up in the rankings of iTunes and Spotify and get this podcast out to as many people as possible to be financially resilient. So if you haven't yet left a review, I know it's a bit of a pain to do them. The simplest way is just to Google how to leave an iTunes review. But I would be super appreciative, I can't get my words out today, if you would be happy to leave just a 1-line review. 5-star review would be absolutely amazing. Thanks very much, and I look forward to catching you on the podcast next week. Take care.